Hi everyone, welcome back to the Australian Rotary Health podcast called The Research Behind Lift the Lid. I'm Jessica Cooper, and on episode 33 we have two special guests today, Dr Reneta Slikboer and Kristy Bruton. Dr Reneta is a research fellow at Swinburne University of Technology, the Centre of Forensic Behavioural Science. Reneta was awarded an Ian Scott PhD scholarship by Australian Rotary Health from 2015 to 2017 for her project called Reward Sensitivity Theory in Trichotillomania. Today with us we also have Kristy Bruton, who has a lived experience of trichotillomania. So we will be having a very interesting discussion about how this problem impacts individuals like Kristy and how research such as Reneta's can have a positive impact on their life. So thank you to both of you, Reneta and Kristy, for both joining me on our podcast today. This is quite a different format to our usual format, but it's really great to have you both, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about your experiences today, Kristy, and I'm sure our listeners will too.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
No worries. So Kristy, I guess you would be the best person to walk us through what trichotillomania is, as you do have that personal experience of it. So tell us, what exactly is it?
So trichotillomania is the urge to pull out one's hair. So it's compulsive hair pulling in a nutshell. But it's not just your usual facial hair. It's it could be any hair on the body. The urge has been described as something's been described similar to would be like a craving, whether it be for us for an easy thing to compare it to is like smoking. Okay. So when you're trying to quit smoking and how that craving is, or even with food, I guess, that's what we feel when it comes to trick. We want to, well, me in particular, I want to stop, but it's not that simple. As a lot of people will know when they've tried, obviously to quit certain things. And so it's just that never ending want to pull and it's itch, I would say, to get to the hair or to release it and stuff. It's very odd, but it's also very common. It's just not widely discussed. So it's something like this has actually been really, really good. So I'd like to thank you, Jessica, for inviting us on. Yeah, and of course, Rennie and her research is just amazing.
Well, it's really great to have you talk about this as well. I mean, I'm sure not many people have really heard this kind of perspective before. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I guess what kind of impact has this had on your everyday life?
For a long time there, I was pulling from my scalp nearly to the point that actually in 2015 I was combing half my hair over to cover it. So it affected a fair bit of the public life, sort of that, I wouldn't go out. I wouldn't socialize. To be honest, it probably just affects everyone. It affects everyone differently, but it becomes I run the support groups, which I can talk about later if you want. So everyone's experience is different, but there are a lot of common factors, such as it takes so long to get ready to face the world because of the problems, whether it be for me, for instance, I've plucked my eyebrows, so I have almost no eyebrows. So I draw them on, but some people might have no hair or have like blotches and patches that they need to cover up. And it's just that added extra stress of getting ready either in the morning to go to work, or just even the simple chore of ducking down the shop or something. Like, it can just be a bigger deal to someone who has has the trick, and it is either if they pull on the hair of their face, or if they pull on their scalp, I should say, it can be a bigger deal. And when you pull from other places, it can be it can be like for those that pick on their legs, like wearing shorts or a skirt for girls, or like swimwear. Like, it's very common. I've heard of a lot of people actually don't go swimming or go to the beach or anything with trick because of all the healed scars or something of their legs, or and that sort of thing. So it can be a big deal for those that suffer with it, and it's more common than anyone thinks. And one thing that comes out of every meeting is that everyone is so stunned by the fact that they're not alone. That everyone thinks before they find help, or they find the support group, or they find ARCVIC, then they think that they're alone. And it just astounds me how much in those meetings people just voice their appreciativeness of those sort of outlets for them.
Yeah, well, it's good that they've got that kind of, positive outlet to kind of meet with like-minded people and really kind of bond together in that experience. I know, it really
definitely
sounds like it could be quite distressing for many people out there. So, I mean, it sounds like it's a good thing that you're involved in these groups.
Yeah, when I went to my first meeting, probably 2013, between 2012 and 2013. And I remember it took me probably 12 months before, like, I went to my first meeting. Like, I found out about them, and then it took me 12 months to work up the courage to actually go to one. And so that in itself is a huge accomplishment for anyone that does that. Especially, I mean, with the COVID times, obviously it's changed to Zoom calls and stuff, so it's not as, I mean, it's daunting, but it's not, you don't have to physically get out of the house or anything. But yeah, hopefully once this COVID thing is sorted, the face-to-face will start again. But we're also keeping the Zoom meetings, just because sometimes people with this condition don't want to go out of the house, or don't want to be in that close proximity of other people. Like, sometimes it takes a little bit. And at least with the online version, they can sort of test the waters, I guess, before making the big step to face-to-face.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for sharing your experience. And I guess, how did you two meet each other?
Through ARCVIC, actually. Rennie was running a group when I first started going.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Well, I guess, I'd really like to hear more about some of Reneta's research. You did a PhD with support from Australian Rotary Health. Could you tell us what led you to pursue research into this particular area of mental health?
Sure. So I was volunteering at ARCVIC as a support group facilitator for the Trichotillomania group. I really was interested in what I was seeing in the group. But I also had the decision to make about what honours project I was going to take on. And I decided to do a meta-analysis on treatments for trichotillomania. So whilst I was looking at the literature and the treatments available, I was also hearing what the participants in the group were saying. And it became incredibly obvious to me that what was in the literature was not matching what I was hearing in the group. So that really interested me, and I thought, that's really wrong. So like some of these treatments were reporting, oh, they're 90% effective, and I'm thinking, really, is that the case? Because that's not what I'm hearing in the group. Something's really going wrong here. There's a real mismatch. And that's what inspired me to keep working on this and try to untangle what's really going on. And that's why I chose this as a topic for a PhD.
Yeah.
That disconnect between the knowledge, the scientific knowledge in the literature, and the reality of people experiencing trick. I just felt like the research community were doing people with trick a disservice. So I really wanted to get the input of the people with lived experience.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough. Yeah, working in that area and seeing firsthand what the experiences are, that would really kind of give you a good idea of what's working and what's not. So yeah, that sounds like it would have been really important for your research. So what exactly did your PhD project involve? What were you trying to find out or test?
It was basically a really simple question. Why do people pull their hair? What's motivating them? What's driving it? What's maintaining it? But I wanted to answer that question from multiple perspectives. So not just answering that question in terms of the psychology or in the terms of how people are processing their emotions, but on multiple levels. So I looked at people's emotions, people's cognition, people's behaviours. I used brain imaging techniques. I looked at the neuropsychological functions that might contribute to the disorder. So I looked at a whole range of different kind of ways of answering why do people pull their hair, which involved a series of studies using multiple methods and multiple techniques to try and sort of weave together a bit of a story about what's driving the behaviour.
And so in terms of your findings, so why do people pull their hair?
If I had a clear answer to that, that would be great and that would be really helpful. But I guess Kristys already touched on some of the things. She specifically touched on a behavioural thing of avoidance, which in my research has come up a lot. One particular study, which was a factor analysis, showed that there are 5 main areas that people with trick tend to engage in avoidance with. So they tend to avoid following sort of non-social goals. They tend to conceal things about themselves that are really important, information that's really about themselves. So not things that happen to them, but information about themselves. They tend to conceal that a lot. So when you think of that a little bit like keeping secrets to yourself about yourself, they tend to engage in behavioural social avoidance. And Kristy expanded on that beautifully earlier, where she was talking about not wanting to leave your home because of fear of embarrassment, or fear of sort of going to a coffee shop with friends because maybe you've had a bad session the night before and pulled out a lot of your eyelashes and you don't want your friends to notice, that sort of thing. So a lot of that sort of behavioural social avoidance. There's also a tendency for individuals to avoid relationship problems. So noticing that there are problems in the relationship, but kind of avoiding having to deal with them. So that sort of relates a little bit to the self-concealment when you start thinking more generally about intimacy. And there's also a tendency for people with trick to avoid thinking about the future. And that sort of ties into the anxiety and sort of depression that sort of often comes along with those who experience trick. So that was one study. There are 2 other studies that I think were really important, had really important results, but not so much for one because of the scientific content, but another because of the awareness it would raise and how much it will help people with trick. So the qualitative study that I did, I interviewed 20 people with trick in really in-depth interviews. I spoke with them for about 2 hours about their experience, and they shared a lot of really sensitive and often embarrassing stories with me that I was able to pull together and sort of weave together these stories in in a paper that can now be read by psychologists and other people interested in this disorder, so they can better understand and empathise with people like Kristy who have sort of been battling this for a while. So for that reason, that is perhaps one of the studies I'm most proud of. Yeah. But the final study I'd like to mention, sorry for taking so long, but it's just one more study I'd like to mention, which is a longitudinal study. And the reason I want to mention this study is because it shows how that disconnect, and it sort of in a way describes what brought me into this area of research in the first place. Remember, I was talking about it's got a 90% success rates versus what I was hearing in the support groups. Well, this study showed that simply attending a 3-day retreat, like an intensive retreat where you're talking about Trich with other people with Trich and you've got facilitators, that intervention gives individuals the same reduction in symptoms as one-on-one long-term treatment.
Wow.
So that is something that service providers need to think about. People who are experiencing Trich may like to view such a thing or such it's not a treatment, but it's like a sharing, it's like a community that you build around yourself as something to add to the treatments that you're already involved with. Because people with Trich have often talked about sort of the isolation and loneliness involved in the disorder. And an intensive 3-day retreat addresses that directly.
Yeah. So is that something that you might have been involved in, Kristy, in one of these 3-day retreats?
Yeah, I actually attended one in, I wouldn't actually know the year, but it was pretty much, I think it was a year or two after I started going to the support group. And yeah, it was like an amazing 3 days. We're actually in Hillsville, I think, Hillsville Sanctuary. And it was like relaxed in a way, not just like therapy and stuff. It actually wasn't therapy at all. I mean, it probably could be counted as it, but we just did like little activities such as like we did craft activities at night, we did some meditation, singing bowl meditations, we did like a photography session, like where we were encouraged to bring our own cameras and stuff. So we'd go around the nature reserve and take some photos, and then we put a slideshow on about our 5 most proud photos that we like, and just little things like everyday activities, but doing it with people that actually understand and can relate to what you're feeling. Like that's what I found for me as someone who suffers with it. That's what I found most about that trip, was that it was just, you were surrounded by people that knew exactly what you're going through. And the detail in which we can talk in regards to Trich, like with other tricksters, is like, it's so funny. Like we constantly mention it. It's just so funny, the amount of detail we can actually use, like, because we can understand it. So I guess, yeah, like Rennie said, it's about that connection with other people, because you do feel so isolated with something like this that isn't very widely talked about. Just finally having the outlet to express and talk freely about is just amazing.
So I guess that might be one example of how Reneta's research has positively impacted, the lives of real people who are experiencing trichotillomania. Would you say that?
Oh, definitely, yes. Rennie's research has really opened eyes, and I think that's the main thing that we need as a group, is because it is so it's swept under the rug a lot, because it is such a weird, odd thing. I was going to say weird then, but no, it's I'm allowed to say weird about myself. It's an odd and unusual disorder that is, sometimes for some people can be extremely embarrassing. And so when people like Rennie do the research that she does, and that creates the attention of health professionals and stuff to actually expand their knowledge, because another common issue is that we as sufferers are teaching our doctors because they haven't got a clue what it is, or how badly, or how it affects everyone's day-to-day life. Most of the time, all the people that come to the meeting and stuff just say, yeah, I'm teaching my doctor, like literally. So when Rennie does studies like this, it just helps reach the field that we need to reach it.
It's really good to have you here today to really show that real impact that research seems to have on, you know, the lives of real people. I think that's something that our Rotarians would really love to see. They're the ones who sort of raise the money for our research, and they put a lot of hard work into that. So really, seeing the impact that comes from their hard-earned dollars and fundraising, that's really great. And I really do appreciate you sharing everything with us today.
No worries.
And so I guess as well, Reneta, where has this initial research taken you in your career today? Like what have you been doing now?
I've kind of gone sideways. So it's going to seem a bit strange. So I've actually got a lot of data left over from my PhD that I can continue to analyse and publish. There's probably another six studies that can be published from the data that I've got. And I spent a large portion of the COVID lockdown, in fact, teaching myself how to do MRI analysis and coding in Bash, in a Linux system, so that I could actually analyse the data that I collected. Unfortunately, you can't eat research or pay rent with research unless somebody's funding you to actually finish the research. Sometimes it doesn't get finished. And that's unfortunately what has happened with a lot of this data. So because I needed to pay rent, I had to take on another job. And this job I was able to get, I think, in large part because of the experience that I developed through the PhD. And that's things like how to design a study, what statistics to use, what are the practicalities around budgeting for the research. So now I'm working on online child sexual exploitation research, which is a completely different topic, but it's also something I'm quite passionate about, and something that's very important in society. But I think having the Ian Scott Scholarship gave me the ability to actually learn those skills, develop those abstract models in my mind where I can sort of slot in various problems and variables so that I'm able to pivot and apply these abstract structures to different problems. And so I would say the biggest long-term thing that I have got out of getting that scholarship was the ability to continue working in research, even though it's a different topic. Without that support, it would not happen. And I imagine that's the case for a lot of people because there's only so much funding that can go around. So I appreciate the opportunity very much.
Yeah, well, there's certainly many areas of mental health out there that can be explored. So I think it is good kind of giving these early career researchers their, little kickstart to their research career, and then, seeing where that takes them. So, even if it's not in the same area where they started, there's so much potential, I think, as well. So that's it's good to hear that, you're still in the research field, looking at a different area and finding new passions. So that's good. I guess as well, maybe could you maybe just explain like why it might be so important to sort of continuing supporting research? I mean, you said before that funding is hard to get. Why is it important to have funding, for researchers like yourself?
When you think about I have a beef with this idea, this word that we say rare disorders or rare medical problems or rare things. So I don't think that word really encapsulates the scope of what we're talking about here. So when we apply that word rare to trichotillomania, what we're talking about is a lot of people. So when you think of a very conservative estimate of how much, sort of a percentage-wise of people with trich, we're talking about 1%. Within a population of 25 million in Australia, we're talking about over 6 million people. So when you say rare, 6 million people is still a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that's basically the population of Geelong, just to make it really concrete.
Okay.
So that's why it's important to keep funding research. Even though a disorder may be called rare, you're still talking about 6 million people. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that really puts things in perspective, because I don't think maybe not a lot of people have heard of trichotillomania. So, it is good to, do research into, you don't like to say rare, but, rarer sort of disorders like that. But, obviously it is still impacting a lot of people. And so it is still important, even if it is, not as, not as heard about or talked about. So I really appreciate both of you coming on the podcast today to talk about this, and hopefully, more people can learn about what trichotillomania is and the kind of impacts that it has on people. So, thank you so much again.
My pleasure, Jessica.
Yeah, no worries. The more word we can get out about it, it's great, because it does affect, a lot of people. And, having the support of people who are familiar with what you're feeling is just, I think, one of the keys that people can use to unlock their recovery if that's what they're seeking. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you so much again.
No worries.
My pleasure.
That was the 33rd episode of our podcast called The Research Behind Lift the Lid. It is always so inspiring to hear what researchers in Australia are doing to make a difference to mental health and how they are helping us on our mission to lift the lid on mental illness. If you can, please support important mental health research like Renetas by donating on the Australian Rotary Health website. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next time.